bonus credit was to update the heading with a value that you get out of a form. So let's create a form. We no longer need this button. That paragraph was just for decoration. So was the second H1. It was just there for the sake of demonstrating that selector trick. So let's make a form. You'll never guess what the HTML element is. It's called form. You'll notice if you use the emit abbreviation expansion that it will put an action attribute in there. We don't need that because it's not actually getting submitted anywhere. So here's our form. Inside the form, you put inputs. And it used to be that the standard required that you put it inside another element inside the form. I don't think you have to anymore, but you still usually want to. So I'm going to put it inside a paragraph. So inside the paragraph, I'm going to put an input field of type text. That's the default, but it's good to be explicit. Input of type text. We're going to give it a name so that we can refer to it later with JavaScript. So name equals, this is a user directory, so let's make user name. I'm going to camel case it like that, lowercase u, capital N, because that's how things are typically named in JavaScript, and we're going to be accessing this with JavaScript. So it's going to be easier to remember if we're just consistent. Oh, look at that. It's so beautiful. Of course, our JavaScript is freaking out on us now because it's trying to add an event listener to something that's no longer on the page. So we'll just get rid of this stuff for the moment. Make our error go away. Now, there's no indication that this is supposed to be a name, is there? So let's add a label. Put it right above the input, and that is an element of type, you'll never guess it, label. And it automatically puts a for attribute in there. You know what that is? That's to say what input that label labels. It labels username. So we put the same name that we put on the name attribute on the input. And that still doesn't do anything visible. You have to actually put some content inside the label. So we'll put name. And now it's labeled. Does anybody know what the purpose of specifying which field the label is for? Anybody know what good that does us? It doesn't change the appearance. We can take it out. Looks the same. Oops. Anybody have any guesses? Wow. Yeah.
It's just useful later on if you have a lot of labels. Like you're trying to need to know which one is which.
It's useful if you have more than one. It is, but it still won't look any different to us. So there are a couple of reasons it's a good idea. One is for people using assistive technology to browse the web, like a screen reader. So blind users would use a screen reader, and they don't use a mouse to click on form fields, right? They use tab to tab between fields. And when you tab into that input, if there's no label for it, they don't know what the heck it is. But if there's a label for it and it's marked as being for that field, then the screen reader will read the label and they'll know what they're typing. So that's one use. Another, if, for example, you're using a checkbox and you have a label for that checkbox, the checkbox itself is a really small target to click on, even if you are using a mouse or a trackpad. But if you have a label for it, you can click on the label and it will actually toggle the check mark, which is really handy and really annoying when it isn't there, if it's something that you happen to have just gotten used to without even realizing you're used to it. So always a good idea to do it. There is another way to achieve the same thing. Instead of saying for, you could put the input inside the label, actually inside the same element. That works too. We're going to do it this way. So now we have an input. It has a name, and it has a label. And it does nothing. So let's add a submit button to this form. So outside the paragraph, but inside the form, I'm going to put another button. And even though it's the default, I'm going to say button type equals submit, just to make the point that there's more than one type of button. And this is going to be a submit type button. And we'll just say go. Very good. Now I want something to happen when that form is submitted. Did anybody's homework work when you hit the enter key, or did everyone have to click the button? Yours did? Yeah, what'd you do? Some Stack Overflow stuff.
I used an event listener on the form. It was something like that, like get
Mm-hmm.
my ID, and then I used an event listener on that once I've drawn the form. And then I had to like make it
What event did you listen for?
submit, I think. Yeah. And then I just told it not to, I think because by default it just like submits the page and like refreshes it kind of. Or I guess it like adds the query or whatever.
Uh-huh.
To it. So I had to make it not do that. And then
All right.
I just changed that.
Okay, cool. So using Stack Overflow is fine, but try to learn something from it. It sounds like you did because you were able to explain what you did. So good job. So yeah, we have to do that thing. So if you listen for a click on a button, the only way to trigger that event is to click the button. A lot of times when we're typing in forms, when we get finished with it, we just hit enter on our keyboard, right? And if you're not using a mouse or any other touch device, you're not ever clicking a button. So if we have a form, we want to actually submit the form. So the events we've been listening for so far have all been clicks, but there are many, many events in JavaScript in the DOM. And submit is one of them. So we can listen for a submit on the form. And since this button is a submit button, clicking that will also trigger that. It would trigger a click on the button, but it would also trigger a submit on the form. So that's what we're going to do. Let's give our form an ID. User form, like that. And we want to listen for a submit event on that form. How do I get that form from the page? What do I type in my JavaScript to get the form from the page? How do I do it? Kushali. And what around it? You could do get element by ID, but document.querySelector is what we're going to use most of the time here because it's more flexible. Documents.querySelector hash user form. That ought to do it. We'll change that. We'll save that to a variable called form. Why not? Then we want to listen for an event on that form. The event is not going to be a click, but a submit. How do I do it? How do I do it, Matt? I want to listen for that event. Mm-hmm. What do I start typing? What do I type first? Form.add event listener. And what do I put in parentheses first? It's not a click this time, though, right? It's. No, we're not. So we're not going to explicitly listen for pressing the enter key either. We're just going to listen for the form to be submitted, which can happen by pressing the enter key or by clicking the button. So this will capture both if we just listen for the submit event. Right. Thank you for playing. Now then, after we add the event listener, we need to run some sort of function, right? We haven't written the function yet. So we can just leave this as is for now. I'll just comment this out. Inside your editor, many popular editors, command / or control / will comment or uncomment a line. We haven't talked about JavaScript comments yet, but C++ comments / work. So do C-style block comments. slash star, star slash. I don't recommend those style of comments because there are some parsing issues under certain circumstances. So it's a good idea to just use the line-by-line comment. If you need to comment out more than one line at a time, highlight multiple lines and use your editor to comment and uncomment. So I'm commenting that out because it's going to throw an error otherwise because we didn't finish adding the event listener. But we know we need to. But first we're going to write our function, right? So let's write a function. We'll say const, I'll call it handle submit. I think we had handle click before. Const handle submit equals function. And we learned yesterday that whether we ask for it or not, an event is going to be passed in as an argument to this. So I'm going to go ahead and put it in parentheses to remind ourselves. I'll call it EV. Then what we're going to do for now is update the heading again. So we already did that once. Const heading equals document.query selector. The string h1. Heading.text content equals something. Equals what? How the heck do we get something out of that input? Let's add a breakpoint and explore in the console. So right inside this handle submit function, I'm going to put debugger to add a breakpoint. And now when that executes, it'll pause. So let's uncomment our event listener here. Form.add event listener. Submit is the event we're listening for. And handle submit is the function we want to run when that happens. Not the return value of handle submit. We don't want to execute it. We just want to pass it as an argument. Right? Let's see what happens. Refresh the page. Let's try typing something in here. I'm going to hit enter. Oh, look at that. Now I'm inside handle submit. So this is the sources tab. And there's a lot of stuff in here. You can see things like all of your local variables inside this function. I see EV is here. I see this is here. You can see the call stack and all kinds of other stuff. We just want to jump to the console. So we have EV, right? That's our event. And we learned yesterday, events have targets. And the target is the thing on which the event happened. So yesterday it was the button. What's the event target going to be today? What fired the event? Yeah, Jacob. The form. The event target is the form. So I wonder what kind of fun properties the form has. ev.target. All kinds of good stuff. Ooh, elements. Event.target.elements. Let's see what that is. Okay, looks like some kind of array-like structure called an HTML form controls collection with two elements in it. 0 is the input. 1 is the button. So it seems like I could say ev.target.elements square bracket 0 and get the input. But that does depend on my knowing that it's the first thing in the form, and that seems very brittle. It seems like it could break easily if we change this thing some more. But we could do it. Once we have the input, how do we get what we typed in it? Value, right? Dot value. So it seems like that would work. I didn't want to give an ID to the input if we don't have to. I don't want to change the markup unnecessarily. But that's pretty ugly. I don't like that particular way of getting it, but it works. But notice there's also username here as a property of ev.target.elements. ev.target.elements, instead of saying square bracket 0, it looks like I could say .username. And sure enough, I get it that way too. We can do one better. The form itself will have a property called username. So I can say ev.target.username and get the input that way. And that seems pretty nice. If we had two forms on the page, that both had fields named username, there's nothing illegal about that. That's totally allowed. We could tell which one it was by being sure that we get it out of the event target instead of just trying to find it by name, searching the entire DOM. So we want to get it from the event target if we possibly can. So it looks like in here, I'll get rid of my debugger. I could say const username equals EV, that's my event that's passed in automatically by JavaScript. Dot target, that's the form. If we want to make sure we remember that, I could say const f equals ev.target. And then say f.username dot value is the actual name, right? That's the actual string. Make sure that's right. ev.target.username.value. Sure enough. So then we set heading.textContent to username. And if our calculations are correct, it should do the thing. But we know it's not quite going to work yet, right? Don't tell. All right, let's see what happens. Let's unpause our debugger. Refresh the page. All right. Now watch very carefully. You ready? 1, 2, 3. I saw it work there for a second. Did you see it? Totally worked. And then it refreshed the dang page. And yeah, if we look at the URL up here, it added a query string. What happened? Well, before we just had buttons on the page. And when we clicked on a button, the default behavior for a button that isn't inside a form is to do nothing. But there is a default behavior for submitting a form. And that is to actually submit the form to whatever URL is specified in the action attribute. Now, we left that blank, which just makes it submit to itself. But it does make it redraw the page. So while it very happily updated that heading, it did not stop it from doing what it always does and submitting the dang form. So we need to stop that. This was the other thing that Rayan found that he had to fix. So let's do this debugger business again. Let's have a look here. Whoops. Refresh. Let's submit something. Oh, yeah. All right. So I've got my event. Let's drill into that a little. Ooh, what's this? Default prevented false. So we said that forms by default submit when you submit them. Makes sense, right? Which will refresh the page. We need to stop that from happening because we just want the event handler that we wrote in JavaScript to happen and then nothing else. So we want to prevent the default behavior. But it says default prevented is false. We want it to be true. Well, it turns out event has a method on it called, what else? Prevent default. Run that, unpause our debugger, and it changes it and does not refresh the page. So the very first thing we'll do in our handle submit function is ev.prevent default. And now it will stay there when it finishes. Is it all true? Type in the name. Hey, it worked. Does it work if we actually click the button? Because I haven't actually tried that since saying that. MANSI, is that right, Monty? There we go. I did it again out of habit. I can't keep my fingers off the dang enter key. Emma. Click. Totally works. Go us. We did it. What did we do? Git add, git commit, What will this commit do? This commit will update the heading with a value from the form.